If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you're a hunter or you just enjoy the great outdoors. Now's the time to step up. There have been countless efforts to vilify hunters, denounce the legitimacy of the science-based wildlife management model. There's no science to this stance, and it is solely emotionally charged. We don't want to see what happened with the grizzly hunt replay itself again with the remaining large carnivores and big game species. It's a slippery slope, folks. We need to stand together. Now is the time for hunters to be united across all organizations and show our combined support. Please go to wildsheepsociety.com/act now and follow the steps. It doesn't take much time and it will help save the future of hunting. This applies to residents and non-residents alike. Please, let's use our voice and be heard. On with the show, folks. This is episode 26 of the Wilderness Locals podcast. On this episode, I chat with Robbie from Blood Origins. Blood Origins are films, podcasts, and written stories conveying the truth around hunting. This podcast is brought to you by Kafaru International, the toughest hunting gear on the planet, bar none. Frontiersman gear, high quality, completely custom handmade knives made in the heart of the Peace Country. And as always, we're brought to you by Just Shooting Arrows, BC's premier archery shop.
Good.
Yeah.
So you're saying I inspired you?
Absolutely.
Wow. I'm amazed. Thank you.
There you go. So, I mean, I think we could start this thing off by saying, man, thanks for what you do in the hunting community and the information that you hand out, man. It's
you're certainly welcome. It's something that is near and dear to our heart. Obviously, as I said, I've got two small boys that I want them to grow up as hunters, and I want them to, even if they decide not to be hunters, I just want to give them the opportunity, because I never got the opportunity when I was growing up in South Africa.
Yep.
And so, yeah, everything we do through Blood Origins is aimed at conveying the truth around hunting and hunters. And the best way to convey the truth about a hunter is to tell their story.
Absolutely. And so that kind of brings us to how we normally start this thing. And we pretty well always start these with, who are you? What do you do? And how did you get into hunting? And I think people can figure it out. You're Robbie from Blood Origins.
It's funny you say that. It's, Blood Origins, it's not about me, Tyler.
Yeah.
I happen to be the face. I happen to be the guy pushing the stone, but it's about us. It's about our community. There is no ego in Blood Origins. It's all about us. It's all about showcasing our community. So yes, I am Robbie. I am the founder of Blood Origins. I built it 4 years ago, and I just happen to be the guy pushing the stone.
That's awesome, man. The ego thing speaks to me. I mean, guys laugh on here all the time because there's been a lot of people that have wanted to do this podcast, but their ego gets in the way of coming on here. So that speaks to me near and dear. And I mean,
well, you can imagine how many times we get people reaching out to us saying, you need to tell my story.
Yeah.
And as soon as someone says that, we're definitely not going to tell your story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the hunting community, like what you're doing, needs to hear real stories and from real people that are doing the stuff for the right reasons. And I mean, that might be a little altruistic, the right reasons, do it for the right reasons. But I think it's not hard to see who's doing it for maybe the likes on Instagram or whatever. And
well, isn't that the whole, one of the downfalls of hunting right now, is doing it for the right reason?
Yeah, we'll dive deep into that. I have a whole section in my notes here that's labeled something along those lines. So how did Blood Origins come to exist then, man? Like what was the thing that made you push that stone?
I was getting into hunting. I probably was a hunter 2 or 3 years. I'd evolved through the various steps of being a hunter, and I had 2 small boys. And I really started, and I got a job, I got more resources. So I started exploring more hunting opportunities, and I started thinking more and more and more about like, I need to understand like why I'm doing this. I need to understand it because I need to communicate it to these two boys that I'm taking out into the woods trapping, for instance, right? Yeah. And when I kill something in front of them, knowing my oldest, the first thing he's going to ask me is like, Dad, why did you kill that? Mm-hmm. And I had to explain why I killed it. And I had to explain it from a science perspective. I had to explain it from an emotional perspective. I had to explain it in through all the questions that a 7-year-old boy would put onto me. And it was important for me to be able to answer it because what I was doing right then and there was laying a foundation internal to them of why they are going to hunt in the future.
Yeah.
And so it sort of breaks a cycle of, the narrative of who we're supposed to be as hunters starts by understanding why you hunt and then passing that why down to the next generation so that when they're raised up as hunters, they're doing it for the right reasons. We've already talked about it. They're doing it for the right reasons. They understand why they're doing it. They have a foundation for why they do it. Yeah. And so I looked around and I couldn't find anyone giving me that information. I couldn't tell, I couldn't pick up the phone and speak with someone and say, well, explain to me why you're doing this thing. Mm-hmm. Because as we know, the outdoor industry is all about self and it's all about filming hunts. Yeah. And really all it was about was people, on hunting shows, killing animals, which is inherent to hunting. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But there's much, much more to it than just that. And we all know it. Yeah. But it's not sexy and it doesn't sell and it doesn't sell the outdoor brand products that sort of pay the paychecks. So I just decided to film someone's why, and that's how it started. Nice.
I mean, I obviously feel like there's a huge place for that and a huge need for it. And I mean, the content that you put out is fantastic at giving people kind of the ability to answer some of those questions. And then once they've answered a few of those questions, it kind of helps arm them with the conversations that they're going to have going through life as a hunter.
Right.
Which is one of those things that, I mean, I want to get into this later too, about, guys sort of compartmentalizing themselves like inadvertently. A lot of people wear this whole, adult onset hunter thing as a badge, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well, hunters are hunters. We all need to stick together, right? That being said, though, a lot of people that start hunting later in life, like it sounds like both of us did, you kind of need to develop those tools because the first thing anybody ever asks you is, oh, why? Why do you do that? And then, you don't just keep the horns. We hear that over and over again. Like,
sure.
The last guest I had on here before you is a young guy. He's 26 now. And, I mean, he has a really good social media and he's done some really cool hunts and stuff. And he had a picture of a really nice mule deer buck on there. And one of the first comments on it is, why do you guys go to the woods and kill those things? It's senseless. And then he has the tools to get back on there. And instead of hitting them with the shut up, man, you don't know what you're talking about, he eloquently explained it. And the guy ended up changing his stance on it by the end of it. He goes, man, I'm so glad you explained that to me. Now I understand. Exactly. Right. It's having the tools in place is just, it's major. And I mean, it's something that I struggled with for years getting going, cause it's like, if you come from a background where you don't hunt, your mom goes, oh, why do you want to do that? You want to go shoot Bambi? Right. Yeah. So, I mean, again, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's huge.
No, that's it's what we do, man. And I think to the point that you just made, the way someone interacts with someone, right? That's how, we're very cognizant of how we interact with people. Yeah. We're very cognizant of the rhetoric that we put out. We're cognizant of how it's perceived, how it's felt, how someone's going to react to it. And we want to make sure that, we're opening ourselves up for dialogue, and we want that dialogue because we want to be able to explain ourselves, and we want to, come across that we're not, in this defensive posture in the corner waiting to punch you in the nose.
Yep.
But rather, look, we get it. When you say, we're bloodlusting killers and that you're an MF of this and MF of that, I get it. We have a PR problem with hunting. We do. Mm-hmm. And I get it. But let's just talk through, why I decided to hunt this animal, or do you know the consequence of the action that I just undertook for wildlife, for people, for communities? Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of things that then you can open up in those dialogue exchanges.
So one of the things that kind of connected us here was I am one of the Blood Origin supporters. I
much appreciate.
Yeah,
you, Tyler.
No worries. And I mean, I think it's important to support guys that are helping out in our community. I mean, that's a big part of what we do here, talking about different conservation campaigns and stuff like that. And then it got the conversation kind of rolling between you and I. And so, as you know, I'm in British Columbia, and there is all kinds of stuff always going on in British Columbia because we're one of the few places that have the diverse ecosystem that we do. And we're one of those places that has a diverse population of people that all believe different things. And there's a big metropolis down on the southwest coast here of people that don't exactly agree with hunting because for the most part, because they don't understand it, I think. I mean, I'm kind of drawing a conclusion there on a large group of people, but that's what it seems like from people I talk to anyways, right?
Well, don't understand it, are disconnected, not understand, don't have an understanding of how Mother Nature works, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I find myself like regularly having these conversations, with people that are outside of our hunting community and trying to, as you said, push the rock a little bit, right? Do some gentle educating without offending, and maybe changing some minds here and there, and maybe scoring some points for our team a little bit. So kind of where I wanted to go with this is the predator management thing has been in the forefront of everybody's kind of social media feed and discussion and news feed. And there's right now there's a Wild Sheep Society campaign going, an Act Now campaign to let all of our local representatives, government representatives know that, hey, we want the wild places and wild things to be managed with science, not with, this social pressure stuff. And there's been some interesting discussions throughout the hunting community here in BC about it. So a few of these hunting conservation organizations here have mounted campaigns. And because of that, there's an okay push, but it's pretty, I mean, not to offend anybody, but it's pretty pathetic when you think about it. Cause I think we're at like, one of these things is at like 8,000 signatures and one's at 5,000, and we're approaching, a month and a half of these things rolling. Mm-hmm. Out of, I think there's 100,000 resident hunters here in BC. Like it's a joke. Mm-hmm. And so I guess where I'm going with it is I kind of want to talk about some of these movers and shakers on the anti-hunting side here in BC, guys that move the stone back the other direction.
Sure.
And one of them, you'll know I'm referring to, is a guy over at Rain Coast there, Chris Darramont. And I think you refer to it as the Darramont problem, right?
Oh, I don't think I said the Darramont problem. I just, he has a very, he's a professor in the University of Victoria. He's also a volunteer for Rain Coast. Mm-hmm. And his position at Rain Coast as a volunteer is the director of science.
Yep.
His position at the University of Victoria is a chair position, and if you don't understand what a chair position is, a chair is a funded, endowed faculty position. And there are lots of different chairs in different departments. Like there's a Boone and Crockett chair. There's a, depending on the person who gives the money, they name the chair after the person.
Yeah.
He just so happens to have the Raincoast Conservation Chair at the University of Victoria. So there's certainly a level of influence to the Raincoast Conservation Group and Chris Darramont and his research and his positions.
Yeah.
Chris will be the first one to say that he is a hunter. He is a late adult onset hunter, just like you and me.
Yep.
He hunts for meat.
Yeah.
And the science that he often points to, the surveys that have taken place in America by Fish and Wildlife Service are correct in that, the data shows that people are more willing to accept hunting if it's done for meat than they are for quote unquote trophy hunting.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of nuance behind that because, the idea of trophy hunting needs to be explained. People have this misperception about what trophy hunting is.
Yeah.
I really don't like the term at all.
No.
I prefer to call it selective hunting. And if you took even just a moment to explain to someone, so if you took one of those survey respondents that said, I'm for hunting if you're doing it for meat, I'm against it if you're doing it for trophy hunting. And you say, okay, well, let me explain this idea of selective hunting. What it is that someone goes onto the mountain and selects the oldest, maturest male that they can find on the mountain. And in doing so, it has very little effect on the population itself. The population is essentially, in some cases, depending on the species, like a rhino or something else, like maybe even lions, you actually see a population boost because those older males tend to keep the younger males from breeding and tend to interact in ways that cause some mortality dynamics in the population. And so you've got a positive population effect of hunting those animals. You've got the economic benefits that are coming from the pursuit, and that economic benefit ranges depending on where you're hunting them. It could be in Africa, and you've got all the community benefits that come with that. You've got all the habitat benefits that come with that.
Yep.
And in BC, you don't have so much of that, but you've got a big economic engine tied to hunting in BC.
Yeah.
So when you talk about social license, and this is where and I'm not as smart as Chris, I don't quite understand all of the nuances tied to social license. And so I have to keep it very, very simplistic. And to me, when you talk about social license, it sounds like it's an acceptability license, right?
Yeah.
That the public is accepting of us interacting with a resource for certain reasons.
Yeah.
So if society accepts us for meat, great. If they don't accept us for trophy, then I think it always falls on us as hunters that we just need to redefine what trophy is.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep using the word selective.
Yep.
I also think we need to redefine predators specifically. As the reason why we're going out to hunt a predator is for management. And this is where Chris would disagree, that he doesn't believe that that's even possible.
Yeah.
That you can go out and your purpose, here's the difference, right? He doesn't believe that your purpose can be management.
Yeah.
But isn't that tied to again, and I'm way out of my lane here, way out of not my lane, but my league, because again, I don't know the nuances of it. But to me, it seems like if I do it, social acceptability is tied to the purpose of why I'm doing something. If I say that I'm doing it for management, you can't call me a liar for doing it for management.
Yeah.
Which is what the argument with Chris is.
Yeah.
He says, well, you're not actually doing it for management. But that's what I am doing it for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it for management because, to me, every piece of wildlife, all big game needs to be managed.
Yeah.
Regardless if you're a moose, if you're a caribou, if you're a deer, if you're a bear, if you're a wolf. Humans have had an indelible fingerprint on the landscape, and because of that, we need to manage it. So there's a management responsibility, and you can throw around the facts of predator management that you have to, put the screws to them. 70% of the population, 80% of the population, you have to take them out for 7, 8, 9 years to have an effect. There's science to it, and I'm not going to argue with the science. But I am going to say that if I put a little bit of pressure on predators at a certain time of the year when the moose are calving or the caribou are calving,
yep,
I can guarantee you that I have balanced the ecosystem a little bit more in terms of keeping wolves on the landscape, but also keeping the valuable species that drives an economic benefit to outfits, to hunters, and also to Native Americans, right, that rely on that food source, some of which live in BC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, so I ranted a bit there.
That's okay.
To me, I think that's where the sort of the social license logic falls down, because it says, and I'll finish with this statement. To me, it falls down because you're saying it's okay to do it for meat. It's not okay to do it for trophies. Mm-hmm. But then when I say I'm going to do it for management, you don't believe me.
Yeah. So one of the things you just said about knocking that population down during the calving or when the fawns are dropping, I just recently I did half my homework. I'm halfway through the podcast you just did with John Bear, I believe his name is, right?
Yes, sir.
And, I heard him talking about that. He's a farmer, sheep farmer, and he was talking about specifically with coyotes, right? And so here's a spot that Chris kind of contradicts himself a little bit. He goes, you'll have to knock down, I've heard him say 50 to I think 80% of the population of the wolves need to be removed to have any significant change, right, in their population. Because he says a year later, they'll be back to where they were. But then in the next breath, when he's arguing why we're ineffective at doing it, he says, they often rally the anti-wolf people by saying, oh, we don't want them to extirpate the wolf off the landscape. And then he's also saying we can't kill enough to make a meaningful impact, right? That's the part that I get the hang up on, right? It's like there's two arguments and it depends what audience he's speaking to. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like you just said, it's sort of obvious if you're in certain areas at certain times of year, you're going to make a change, right?
It's, again, I tend to, I am a scientist. I do have a PhD, mm-hmm. but I tend to break things down very pragmatically whenever I try to think through things. So when you think through a predator management scenario, very localized, done maybe on a very localized scale, and you put the screws, how they like to say it, put the pressure, take out a couple of wolves in the area, take out a couple of coyotes in the area, especially at a time of year where you are benefiting carving of certain species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is true that you will have the same amount of wolves on the landscape in the next year because I don't know so much about wolves. I don't know the research behind wolves, and I know that they are prolific breeders. I don't know if they've got a density-dependent life history strategy like coyotes do.
Yeah.
But yes, that is true that if there are resources available, which there should be, okay, because we have relieved the pressure, there's more calves on the ground, there's more animals on the ground, more prey on the ground, the wolves should rebound. That makes complete ecological sense. But pragmatically, the rebound of the wolf population the next year is not all of a sudden of adults. There's a lot of pups in the landscape now. And sure, the mother will and the wolves themselves will need to take more prey to be able to feed those pups. But there's going to be a balancing out over some time in terms of management, depression on predators, release of the prey base, increase in the predation, in the predator numbers, hit the prey base. And it's almost this, again, it's not a boom and bust cycle, which is what nature likes to operate on, but rather it's a mitigating of the swings of the cycle when it comes to management of predators. I really am not, the whole adage of, well, just let it be, right? They'll take care of themselves. The coyotes will create density dependence, which is they'll self-regulate, right? And there's alpha males, and the alpha female will create situations where they'll undertake infanticide, which they'll kill pups of females that are getting pregnant or do give birth and give litters. I'm sure wolves and wolf packs do the same thing. They don't like to interact. But eventually that population is going to expand such that they're just going to, start immigrating out of the population. And the numbers are going to get higher and higher. And the prey base is going to be, depressed to a point where, it's funny. I actually laughed when I listened to that podcast with Chris on, I think it was with the it was with the backcountry hunters and anglers guy.
Yep, that's he's a good buddy of mine. Yeah,
and it was a great. I enjoyed the podcast, but it was funny how even Chris himself said when he talked about bears, right? He talked about black bears, and there was no way that Chris had, he hadn't eaten black bear, wasn't going to eat black bear, which is again an interesting piece of the social license that your opinion is that I don't eat it, but it's okay for food. But you're lumping it in with grizzlies and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, he said, yeah, I tend to go where I've gone deer hunting, there's a lot of black bears and there's very, very little deer any longer.
Yeah, I caught that too.
It's like, well, surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a great time to find them in the spring around the kind of fawning areas.
But look, I think that it's certainly something to, I think we've got to look at the social license debate and not look at it as something that is going to go away. Okay.
Yeah.
It is something that's going to stay. So what is it about social license that may force a bit of narrative change when it comes to hunters and hunting? May force a little bit of social media change when it comes to hunters and hunting. The whole idea of, big grizzly bear being taken, right? And is there something about when you post that picture of that grizzly bear, like, why you did it? Explain the context. If you're going to take the meat, tell people you're going to take the meat.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people on both sides of the coin, right, that say, oh, no, we would never eat grizzly meat. There's a lot of people that do eat grizzly meat.
Yeah.
So it's talking about that. I would guarantee you that you are someone in Vancouver, if people eat grizzly meat, you'd probably get 10 out of 10 saying no way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that? Because nobody has, decided to step outside the box of just talking about, a trophy versus talking about the things that are part of the hunt, are part of the experience, are part of the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of things we need to focus on. The social license of like, why are you doing things? We're doing it for management. We're doing it to mitigate human-wildlife conflict.
Yeah.
Those things are okay. Those are socially acceptable reasons for why you do something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that stands out to me is a species that can bounce back year after year, like Chris is saying. Isn't that like a pretty hardy species that can handle a yearly harvest, or hunters taking them off the landscape? Like that seems like a species that you would want to manage more so than a species that is, when you and John Bear were saying, I mean, he said you look wrong at a mule deer and it falls over dead. Like, like some of these other species, you can. I think there's a big point to make too from hunters to non-hunters is like, we want this stuff to exist on the landscape. Like,
absolutely.
Like, I like seeing wolves when I'm out mule deer hunting. I don't want to see a whole bunch of them because I would rather see more mule deer than them, but I want to see them. Like, they're cool. I like to watch them through the spotter, And so, I mean, I think that's just a really important thing for us to share, because like you said it earlier, or maybe it was even on the podcast with John, we're not the bloodthirsty killer with the knife hanging out of our mouth. It's.
No, I think that unfortunately the bad apples in our community.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have the loudest voice, but they become the loudest voice because of the inconsiderate nature of them posting stuff that without them knowing gets picked up by the other side that is completely against our lifestyle.
Yeah.
And used against us. You see it every single day. And, unfortunately, I think things are changing. I think people are starting to point that stuff out and go, that's not okay anymore. Mm-hmm. I think that we are getting over the stigma of, yes, we are a minority community and we need to stand up for hunting, all types of hunting. And that is true. Mm-hmm. But we do not have to stand up for unethical practices tied to hunting. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm always the first person to point out on like my local community page here on Facebook. I live in a pretty rural community, and there's regularly wildlife down where we live, bears, cats, deer, whatever. Right. And, my local community page here, people often talk about, oh, leave that bear alone. That's, the freaking hunters, yada, yada, yada. You'll get, whoever on Facebook going off. And I like to be the first person to point out, like, well, if you shoot that bear there, you are not a hunter. You are a poacher, because that is super illegal. Like there's a way to do it too, without offending people, right? Everybody's all concerned about, what words you use in 2021. And I mean, people misuse that word hunter quite regularly, and it's to our detriment,
Oh, no doubt. They misconstrue hunting and poaching all the time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing in society. So again, it's us doing a better job of explaining ourselves, explaining what we do, explaining why we do it. Because at the end of the day, I think I figured this out, is that the social license is all tied to why someone does something.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe let's dive into the management stuff a little bit more. Because like you kind of referenced Chris's my buddy Chris's podcast Behind the Glass, and kind of at the end of that podcast, Daramont kind of his kind of final thoughts were like, basically lay down and take it. Like you're not going to change the opinions. This is the way it is, you know. Like, and I don't know. It's a pretty thinly veiled thing that he has going on with I'm a hunter too. And I mean, I'm sure he is, maybe he is a deer hunter, but it's like Raincoast is pretty vocal about, you know, coming out as anti-hunting on a lot of different fronts, including black bear stuff. He says, you know, oh, we never talk about black bears. And it's like, you guys have a whole campaign about black bears. Like, I don't know. So I guess where I wanted to go with this is like, I kind of want to talk facts a little bit. And I want to talk about like maybe some specific benefits of predator management and like what species can we actually manage, you know? And it's like you kind of, we only ever talk about hunting. And one of the things too, that they touch on and we get lumped together with all the time is trapping. And I mean, you're a trapper. Some of my closest friends are trapper. The other main contributor to this podcast, Wasey, he's a lifelong wolf hunter and wolf trapper in Alberta. I mean, they make a good living selling coyote trim to Canada Goose for all the downtown Vancouver folks. So, so I mean, I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you is what kind of predator management stuff is actually effective?
Well, I think that question requires a little bit of sort of teasing apart because it all depends on your definition of effective. Okay. And that all ties to the purpose for why you manage. Yeah. It is very difficult, and this is where the science has shown, it's very difficult to show the effectiveness of predator management on a very large scale. Coyotes, wolves, bobcats, mountain lions, it's very difficult to see the impact of here is the causation, this is the action of hunting, and this is the effect. Yeah. However, when you drop it down to very localized or regional type scales, then you do start teasing out different effects of predator management. So for instance, if I am a farmer and I have an economic asset on the ground, which is my calves, my lambs, there is certainly data out there that shows that predators have a significant impact economically on a cow or calf crop on an annual basis. And if proper predator management occurs, and when I say proper predator management, it does not mean extirpation. Yeah. It just means a depression of the population at a specific time of the year. It has shown to decrease, or let me say increase calf mortality, decrease calf mortality of 20 to 30%. So from an agricultural perspective, there are certainly a lot of benefits to predator management. Yeah. On a more localized scale, and here's where the science is lacking. And you'll hear a lot of people say there's no science to back this up. And unfortunately, there is very little science at this local level because it's difficult to get. And the reason I say that, it's very difficult for scientists to get funded to do this kind of work. Okay. So for instance, my local 5,000 acres that is 45 minutes from the house where I like to go trap with the boys. I have seen over 5 to 6 years. 5 years ago, I had maybe a turkey track on the entire 5,000 acres. Maybe a turkey track. Never heard a turkey, never saw a turkey. 6 years later, we have turkeys. And it's because, and again, this is anecdotal. I do not have the definitive science, but prior to us arriving on the property, there was no trapping. After 5 years of trapping of coons, of nest raiding predators, coons and possums and coyotes, we'd never trapped a bobcat. The turkey population is thriving.
Yeah.
And so that's anecdotal, Tyler.
Yeah.
That's not something that's published. That's not something I can point to. But there is lots of that anecdotal evidence all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
That speaks to the effectiveness of localized predator management. And when I say localized, it's also very time specific, because here's what everyone forgets, is that there is a season for trapping.
Yep.
You can only trap from this date to this date. And that's it. You can't trap anymore. You can't kill anymore. You can't hunt fur bearers anymore. Mm-hmm. Coyotes may be a little different, but specifically like coons and bobcats, you can't. So you only have a very small window to put some pressure on them to, release those things that you value on the landscape. And it's not saying that I don't value raccoons and possums and bobcats and coyotes. I do, because I want to still see them on the landscape.
Yeah.
But I also want to be able to hunt quail.
Yeah.
And I also want to be able to hunt turkeys.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in order to balance it, I have to enact some sort of predator management.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that brings us to a good point. Actually, that brings us to a few good points, but, one of the more kind of philosophical things I wanted to talk about was kind of the ideology that some of these people hold, that is like, it's okay to harvest one species over another. And like, I mean, using Darramont for our example, because we've been talking about him, he has no problem killing moose and deer and other ungulates. But he has a hard time with predators. And I mean, it sort of highlights people's opinion and their bias on their stance, right? I mean, I think it might have been on, I can't remember what podcast it was, but I recently heard him say, it's mountain lion hunting is just disgusting. It shakes me to my core.
It was on that same podcast.
Okay.
He said that the thought of eating mountain lions was disgusting.
Yeah. And then, I mean, to my buddy Chris's benefit, he immediately followed it by asking some pointed questions, and Darramont never got to it. He just continued on with emotions and his personal beliefs and stuff like that. So why I bring that up is I kind of want to get to the facts of the matter, like, isn't it super dangerous for us to be managing some species and not all of them when we're in a place in the world now, in 2021, you can say wilderness in air quotes. There's a road cut in everywhere. There's oil and gas everywhere. There's not many places you can go in North America where our thumbprint isn't firmly embedded in the landscape. So I guess what my question is how is it okay to manage some of these things and not others when they're part of the same predator and prey cycle? And we're giving, we're tilting the scales, I think, with how humanity has gone up to this point with industry and everything else.
Yeah. I've said it before. I think that all big game needs to be managed.
Yeah.
I think it's just something that we have to do as stewards. It's something that we have to do as, when you look at from an ecology perspective, you're right. You don't just manage, a certain species. You may do so if there's a keystone species or whatnot's in the landscape, but for the most part, you want to be able to manage all species, use the best science that you have to be able to maintain and increase populations of animals on the landscape. Mm-hmm. The added complication here is that a lot of people forget is that wildlife, just like anything, has a value.
Yeah.
And for it to be able to be on the landscape, it has to have a value. Now, there's going to be certain places in the world, certain places in BC, that it's really truly remote. It's really truly wilderness. Yeah, there may be a road or two there, but it really is that. And the management itself, should be fairly simplistic.
Yeah.
But there's other areas in which there's going to be other areas that certain species would hold greater. And great is not the right word here, but will hold value over other species. Mm-hmm. And because of that certain value, it brings an economic asset to the table. It brings, economic revenues. It brings a whole system tied into maintaining and holding that wildlife on the landscape. And as such, again, everything in this world is driven by economics. It's all driven by money. And so you've got to recognize that. And yes, some people don't like it because we're talking about a living, breathing thing called wildlife, and you're just denigrating it to something that has, an economic value.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. Because that's how the world works. We have, John Bear said this very well, we have wildlife because we hunt wildlife. There is no other economic model by which wildlife flourishes on the landscape. You either hunt it or you don't. And when you don't, you've got to you almost are operating under a let Mother Nature manage herself model. Mm-hmm. But what actually happens in those models, and just look at California as the prime example, mm-hmm. is that the taxpayer then starts having to pay to reduce populations because of the human-wildlife conflict that's occurring.
Yeah.
So you've actually, instead of putting value on the animal, it's now a cost to society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough one to... It's a tough one to swallow, it's a tough one to explain to people. And it's a tough one to kind of, it's a tough situation to explain. And it's the kind of thing that people don't want to put that economic value on wildlife, but you're doing it anyways. I mean, there's economic value on the trees that got turned into the wood that you built your house out of. I had one of the things I had written down here when we get into social license is kind of comparing social license of wildlife with the social license for mining and fishing and forestry and oil and gas. And it's sort of the wildlife one is the one that's skewed, they're fluffy and cute and all that. So it's the one thing that people aren't okay monetizing, it seems. And a lot of the social license stuff, I think, stems from that. Let's get into the social license thing a bit further. One of the things that Chris Darramont points at a lot is he talks about, trophy this, trophy that. And I mean, like you, I am very, very reluctant to say trophy. I mean, the word's been, or the term has been weaponized to the point where it doesn't make sense for us to use anymore. And so, I mean, when they talk about social license, they often talk about, trophy. So horn, antler size, body size. And with that being said, these are kind of characteristics that run along lines in parallel with age, class, and maturity, right? And so kind of the where I would go with that is like, as a hunter, we kind of target older age class species on purpose. And not because, we have horn lust, because we do have horn lust. It's cool to shoot a big animal, right? But we don't shoot a 2-year-old ram over a 12-year-old ram just because of horn size or age class. It's to ensure, proper herd health and ensure we aren't damaging the population. I think that's really important to most hunters that are in the know, right? In BC, we have a large population of California bighorns, and a lot of the limited entry units here, you can shoot a 3/4 curl ram, and a 3/4 curl ram can basically be one of two things. It can be an old mature ram that's broomed off. So like 12, 13 years old, that's been broomed off to 3/4 because they broom around 6 years old normally. And then it takes them a whole bunch of years to get big and mature. Or you shoot a young guy, and it says right in the regulations from the provincial government here, please shoot a mature broomed off ram if you draw the tag. It's not to shoot an immature species. So it's like, I think the trophy thing gets kind of conflated with management too, right? And I have a note here, and I have it written down as a question for you. It says, are the terms trophy hunt and conservation hunt interchangeable? And I think you already hit the nail on the head by saying selective hunt, right?
Well, I'd love to pose the question to someone who answers in the survey again. If they answer, I am against someone hunting for a trophy. Okay. Let's stop for a second, and I'm going to give you a scenario.
Yeah.
If I had two animals on the mountain in front of me, one was 12 years old, had a big rack. One was 2 years old and had a small rack. Which one would you prefer me to shoot?
Yeah.
We've never done the survey. We've never done the science. Maybe we should do the science.
Yeah.
And do a poll. And because my gut says that for the majority, they're going to say shoot the older one.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, and again, this is all hypothetical because we've never done the science and we've never done the survey. But again, it may be worth raising some money to pay someone to do a survey for us. What if the survey, if someone says, yeah, I'd prefer to shoot the older one, then what is it then that we're doing? Are we trophy hunting, or are we, again, selective hunting here? That's nobody's really posed that question, and again, I'd love to know the answer to that.
Yeah. Here in British Columbia, I focus a lot of my time hunting elk personally, and in BC, the majority of the units that we have are 6-point or better units. So you're only shooting mature bulls. That's the way it is. But I bet there's a large population of elk hunters here in BC that flock to northern BC to get in on that cow season and get in on that 3-point season. Now, like you're saying, if we could run that poll and say, hey, who's doing the right thing? Who here is trophy hunting? Is it the guy shooting the mature bull, or the guy going up to northern BC to do the cow and 3-point season? I do really wonder what the population would say. That's super interesting, kind of framing it like that. So I guess what I want to ask you too, Robbie, what's like, if we break it down for people and we're going to give people some tools here, what's the benefit of us taking that mature animal as opposed to that, the old 4-point, 9-year-old buck? What's the benefit to taking him instead of the forky buck?
The benefit is all tied to the sustainability of the population. These older mature animals have passed their genetics on. They've been able to reproduce. They've been able to essentially grow the population. And they're not really contributing to the increase in the population any longer. Mm-hmm. Any animal that you take out of the population that is in a reproductive state, whether that be a female or a male, will have some effect on the growth rate, the lambda of the population.
Yeah.
What you're targeting there is you're targeting animals that are, if removed, would have, really very little effect on the growth rate of that population.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you didn't have hunting occurring, that animal would still die. And that animal would still, there'd still be a certain component of it that ties to the population dynamics of that animal anyway. Mm-hmm. So that to me is the biggest rationale, is that you're taking animals that are going to have very small, if not negligible, impact on the population as a whole. Because again, as hunters, we want to see more wildlife on the landscape. We want to see populations of animals and wildlife grow. There's many, many examples around the world of wildlife populations growing because of hunting. Mm. That's what we want. And so you want to make sure that you're putting management goals in place. And if those goals are often tied to the types of animals that you can take and how many you can take to maximize the sustainability of that population.
Mm-hmm. What you already touched on it a little earlier, but what do you think the population of our wild game and these species we're talking about, what do you think the population of stuff looks like if tomorrow everybody stops hunting? Like, okay, no more hunting. What do you think happens?
They're certainly not going to disappear like certain places in the world. Mm-hmm. So if we stopped hunting in Africa, wildlife is going to disappear because you have a very, very, very large rural population that requires food, and the landscape requires some sort of value to it. Mm-hmm. And if those animals aren't bringing value, then something will bring value, like agricultural crops or something like that.
Yeah.
So wildlife in Africa will disappear. Wildlife in places like Pakistan, they'll disappear too. Wildlife in North America, it will change. It will not disappear. I think you're going to have a significant balance change, shifts in various species biodiversity, because obviously there's no management, there's no hunting management tied to it any longer.
Yeah.
I think you'll see significant increases in human wildlife conflict in America and North America.
Yeah.
I think there'll be an increased incidence of poaching because, some people do it for the meat, and so they'll want to get the meat, so there'll be increased poaching. I think there'll be a lot more of illegal type activities, especially tied to human wildlife conflict. Mm-hmm. To just take care of the thing that that's causing the conflict, take care of it, move on.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of answer you're looking for, but that's me, rambling on. Yeah.
I didn't even have that one written down, to be honest. I just thought of it as we were going here, and it's good to get your insight on all this stuff, because you have thought about a lot of this stuff more than a lot of people have, so it's important. One of the things that I wanted to talk about on this podcast, and I already mentioned it at kind of the front end of it, was having unity between all of our conservation organizations that we support and our community of hunters, and how kind of stressing how important it is that we support each other, and like we talked about, do it through story. And when you read some of these papers that are going on right now, when you do read some of these papers, okay, well, we'll use Darramon as an example again. We're going to bang this drum all episode here. But he talks about the idea of how food hunters need to disassociate with hunters who hunt predators, or what he considers a trophy hunter, to keep social license to hunt. To keep social license to hunt, I guess the species that he, seems to think is okay, like we talked about before. I kind of feel like, personally, I feel like it's sort of compartmentalizing our community is the last thing we need to do, right?
Yeah, I think that, as we said before, I think all hunters need to be for all hunters.
Yeah.
Whether you're a trad hunter, whether you're a meat hunter, whether you're a trophy hunter, whether you like to hunt elephants or you like to hunt pigs, I think we have to be on the same team. Now, we don't necessarily have to agree with one another. So I get a lot of comments when we put something up about elephants.
Yep.
I can almost put money on the fact that I'm going to get 2 or 3 hunters slide into my DMs and say how despicable that person is hunting that great beast. And I said, but you're a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but I'd never hunt an elephant. I said, well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Between you hunting a pig or a lion or an elephant or a red stag? Hunting is hunting. We should all be for hunting. Now, as I said in the beginning, we need to be all on the same team, but we don't necessarily need to allow the individuals that are hurting hunting with the way that they portray themselves, the way that they conduct themselves, the ethics in which they hunt. That's the kind of stuff that we should never condone. I
think what that point you just made about the ethics of how they hunt, I think that's a really critical point in that explanation, talking about some of this African stuff. And I mean, again, like I think you said earlier, you're way out of your lane here. I'm way out of my lane talking about the Africa stuff, the African stuff. But that being said, if the ethics fall in line with doing it for the right reason, like I said at the start of this podcast, doing it for the right reason, some conservation type situation or some economic situation for the local community. I mean, I've heard you talk lots about the African hunts and the reasoning behind them. Then I'm on board, and it's like, I think that ethics portion is the crux of the argument, and I think that carries over to social media big time right now. And that's how kind of as a community, we've sort of ended up in really hot water as of late. You see the picture of the guy with the duck hanging out of his mouth for his grip and grin, or you see the guy doing the dumb stuff that we all shake our head at, and it ends up all over social media and it ends up on every anti-hunting page. And that's what they think we are. I mean, it's honestly shocking to me when I get into these conversations with maybe more liberal leaning people, or maybe people that just have a strong distaste towards hunting. And then we start talking about it, and 9 times out of 10, they leave that conversation feeling a lot better about it, and maybe changing their views on stuff because of how I frame it. At the end of the day, an animal's still dying. I'm still shooting something. I'm still killing something. But they know that the motivation behind it is, I don't want to say good, but maybe falls more in line ethically, right?
Yeah, I think, you're talking about a motivation versus consequence argument. Yeah. And I think that's the social license argument. Yeah. Is that, what are you doing it for versus what is the consequence, and can your motivations line up more with the consequence of your action? Yeah. And I think they can. And I think that's what we need to start pushing our narratives around, is the consequence being the motivation. And it's difficult, right? Don't get me wrong. It's going to be very, very difficult for someone to go to Africa to hunt for conservation.
Yep.
It's not going to happen. But when someone's in Africa, they can always focus on the consequence.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
That's our plan of attack.
For sure. That reminds me of another argument that I think is in the news cycle more often than what we're talking about. And it's the firearm stuff, right? And it's like the part where I get lost in a lot of these arguments on a lot of different subjects is when people start to try to abandon their narrative for a watered down narrative that suits the people that they're talking to more. Like, in BC or in Canada right now, there's a big gun ban going on, and people have started to refer to firearms as with different words and stuff like that to make it seem better. But to me, I find it frustrating because it's like you can be honest and have the message that you need to have at the same time, right? Like I like hunting big mule deer because they're big, they're old, they're mature, they're smart. They have a big rack. I think the big rack is cool, but also it serves a conservation purpose. The science tells me it's okay, but I can also be excited to chase that big, smart old animal because it's tough. I don't think I need to. I don't think. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think there's danger in watering down our stories too much. But I think it's also important to explain them eloquently and in a way that the audience will appreciate.
No, 100%. That's exactly what we need to be doing. Our stories need to resonate. They need to change focus to, our true stories, our true heart, the true why behind what we do, why we do it. And the more we can do that, the more that all hunters can really start contextualizing this idea of why they hunt.
Yeah.
The better off our lifestyle is going to be. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So you're a few hours ahead of me, and I don't want to keep you too late because you got a gang of kids too to take care of.
Yes, sir.
But
gonna turn into a pumpkin soon.
Right. So I just have a little tab here called closing thoughts, and I have a couple burning questions that I don't think either of us will have the answer to, but I will ask them anyways. So how do we get support from the public? What do we do? And I think we just answered that by saying, telling our stories in a honest way, but still eloquent, right?
Yeah. And I would also say that, anything you put out there, always think about it through the lens of a non-hunter. Yeah.
Yeah. Like how do we put it out without antagonizing people, right? How can we maybe put it out in a way?
You should never be posting in an antagonistic form.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to get off topic for 2 seconds. There's a dude whose podcast I listen to. His name's Andy Stumpf. He's a retired Navy SEAL and he's a bow hunter. And he has a rule that he talks about on his podcast. And he goes, I never say anything to anyone online that I wouldn't say to them in an elevator. But the guy's also a badass. He's a Navy SEAL and he's into jiu-jitsu and stuff. So maybe his scope is different than mine. But I often put that into play on social media because you get these people that come at you very aggressively for being a hunter on the internet. And it's really tempting to say something that you wouldn't say to somebody in a small elevator. So I always try to calm it down and give them an answer like we were talking about at the very start of this podcast, like Jeff, the past guest that I had on, did, and give them an eloquent answer that can hopefully change their opinion.
Yep. I'm with you.
I think that's the way to do it. Okay. Pumpkin time. How do they find you? Why should they support you? And how do they listen to you?
You can find us, Blood Origins, on pretty much every platform.
Yeah.
Just type it in: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, website. Why you should support us. I think we're one of the few proactive PR campaigns out there for hunting. Every day we push the message around the truth about who we are and why we hunt. And so, like you said in the beginning, we have a supporters program that is very, very simple. For the cost of a cup of coffee a month, $3, $4, $5. We just want people to, get behind us, and that helps us with our message every day.
Yep. And
because we don't belong to everyone, we don't belong to anyone. We don't belong to any brand in the community. We essentially are built for everyone. We have a bunch of brands that have decided to say that we support you and what you do, and we are turning around and giving that support to the people that are engaged in the supporters program. So every month we have 10 giveaway items that range from seasonings to gift cards to hunts all over the world. So that's why you should become a supporter. If it's not just for the sake of supporting us and our message, then do it because for $4 and $5, you can win thousands of dollars worth of prizes.
Yeah. Or just do what I did and send $100. I didn't even know you could win stuff. So there you go. Robbie,
thank you, Tyler.
Of course. Robbie, thank you for coming on. That was cool, man. Blood Origins. Everybody check them out. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you, my man. I much appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and follow us on Instagram @WildernessLocals, or check out the gear at our website, www.wildernesslocals.net.